Hi everyone, so today I'm going to be talking about the Klondike Gold Rush. So the Klondike is a region of the Yukon Territory in northwest Canada and it lies around the Klondike River. In the short summers, it's usually really warm and intense with light, sometimes even getting up to 22 hours straight of daylight. And in the long, harsh winters, it's extremely cold. By late October, ice is already formed over the rivers, and for most of the year, the ground is actually frozen up to a depth of 1 to 3 meters deep and temperatures around minus 50 were not unheard of. Starting in the 1870s, prospectors started trickling into the Yukon in search of gold. By 1896, around 1,500 prospectors were panning for gold along the Yukon River basin. And on August 16, 1896, George Carmack, Dawson Charlie, and Jim Mason discovered gold on Rabbit Creek, later renamed Bonanza Creek, which ran through both Alaskan and Yukon territories. Conditions in the Yukon were so harsh, making communication with the outside world nearly impossible. And because of this, the word about the Klondike discovery, gold discovery, didn't actually get out until 1897, the following year. So with the discovery of gold finally out for the world to know, thousands quit their jobs and just left for the Klondike. The idea of striking it rich led over 100,000 people on this life-threatening journey to the Klondike. These people were known as stampeders, and these stampeders would then travel to train by train to Pacific Northwest cities. And Canadian authorities required every stampeder to have at least a year's worth of gold mining equipment and supplies before even crossing the border. Some of these supplies required included warm clothes and outerwear, moccasins and boots, blankets and towels so you can stay nice and warm during this, and you would also need mosquito netting, personal care items, medicine and first aid, candles and matches, soap, approximately 1,000 pounds of food, tools and mining equipment, and camping equipment. Getting to the Yukon was no easy task, especially with a literal ton of supplies that you're hauling. And from these port cities, stampeders would travel by steamers either to Skagway or Dyea, and then trek across either the Chilkoot or the White Pass to Canadian territory. So the Chilkoot Trail was a 33-mile long trail that miners had to brave by foot. And they had to do all this with a ton of supplies going through steep, icy terrain and over what's known as the Golden Staircase, what is pictured behind, which is a frozen slope with about 1,500 steps carved into the snow and ice. And if that snow and ice are melted, then the Chilkoot can be described as fearfully muddy, according to Harold Peterson. Crossing this part of the journey was not only a struggle with nature, but just an all-out battle, and many stampeders even gave up at this point and turned around. It took an average of 3 months for a stampeder to cross the Chilkoot. And I have a little video for y'all.
Here, near the top of the Golden Stairs, the steep frozen route is no joke. A slip here would be disastrous. Total concentration and deliberate, purposeful steps are how you stay alive. As I near the summit, the thought of dropping my pack, going right back down to grab another load of gear, and doing this over and over 40 or 50 times in a row is unimaginable. But that's exactly what the stampeders of the Klondike Gold Rush did to shuttle their supplies into Canada.
So once you pass the Chilkoot Trail, then, or I'm sorry, if you didn't take the Chilkoot Trail, then you would take the White Pass Trail. The White Pass was longer than the Chilkoot at 45 miles long, and it lacked all the steep slopes of the Chilkoot. But during the wet fall months, the pass became clogged with thick, slippery mud, making it impassable in some spots. The mud also became a problem for the horses and mules that the stampeders would use to pack out their supplies, and the horses would get stuck in the mud or they would even slip off the trail and die, giving the pass the other name Dead Horse Trail. In the winter, it snowed constantly, and wind chills reached up to 80 below zero. So once you pass these, then you're finally in Canada. And the next part of the journey required stampeders to build rafts and boats for the 400 miles of tricky channels and Yukon River rapids. For those miners coming up on this leg of the journey in the fall, the race against winter and the ice begun. Because if you didn't make it out before winter, then the rivers would obviously freeze over and then you'd be stuck there. So you would have to wait until the rivers thawed out again. And when the ice did finally melt, the miners still faced new challenges such as vicious mountain headwinds and crosswinds, and in the canyons and rapids, rocks and swift waters would smash boats to pieces. So, by the time miners reached Miles Canyon just before the White Horse Rapids, many of the daredevils that shot unnecessary rapids were either killed in action or they just came to their senses. Here, the river narrowed from about 300 feet to just 40 feet, tumbling with concentrated energy through the tall, rocky walls. Just below it, it struck a stretch of threatening rocks at White Horse Rapids, which is also pictured below. Here, miners struggled to stay above water as others were crashing their boats and their goods were just scattered everywhere and splinters of wood all over. So here, about three-quarters of the miners actually hired experienced pilots to take their empty boats through the rapids, while they would haul their freight by pack and tramways. And the fee to hire these pilots was usually around $20 to $40. And once you pass the White Horse Rapids, then the next difficult and dangerous part of this journey is the 30 Mile River. The 30-mile river had 12-mile-an-hour current pushing you through 30 miles of endless rocks and boulders that you were in a constant fight for your life. But when you finally overcome this 30-mile river, then you're finally on the home stretch to gold mining town Dawson City, which is where all those miners were aiming for. It took the Stampeder around 6 months to complete this whole journey to the goldfields. So once you are done with that journey and you're finally in the city of Dawson, only about 30,000 of the 100,000 original Stampeders actually made it to Dawson City, and these gold miners quickly came in, and so did the businesses in Dawson, which turned it into a boomtown. People started opening saloons, hotels, banks, supply stores, anything that the miners needed for their stuff, and just anything for like entertainment or anything to make this into a city. And even the prostitutes started coming in as well. And Dawson also became known as the Paris of the North. So once they got into Dawson, then the gold miners would rush into the gold fields and stake their claims. Some of the most productive gold fields included Hunter Creek, Bear Creek, El Dorado Creek, and Bonanza Creek, where gold was first discovered. From here, miners would start the exhausting process of gold mining. To extract the gold out from the earth, miners went through a long, laboring process to do so. First, they would fight their way through layers of moss and other vegetation, surface muck, permafrost, and underground soil and rock to find the buried gold-bearing bedrock. Next, they would haul that bedrock up to the surface by bucket and windlass and pile them up into giant dumps. So both of these were winter work, and the next and final step to gold mining was the washout. So they would run water through their sluices and rockers to wash away the dirt and gravels and separate out the gold. And this was summer work. So to get to the gold, as I mentioned earlier, they had to fight through the thick layers of moss and vegetation and all the permafrost as well. And in order to thaw out this permafrost, which is permanently frozen ground, the miners would build fires to thaw the earth. And they would build the fires in strategic ways so that the fire would burn or thaw the ground in precise and predictable ways. And once they got through the permafrost, a miner's hope is to find bedrock shortly after. So as miners graveled up all the gravels and bedrock they hoped was filled with gold, They're eagerly waiting for spring and summertime so that they could start sluicing their gold. And when spring finally came and the snow and ice melted, the miners now redirected the flow of water through networks of sluices and boxes to wash their excavated gravel and separate out the gold. Once one worker was designated to shoveling all the thawed out soil into the sluices, and while another would release the water and to separate out all the gravels and gold. One or two miners then tended to the sluices to remove any large rocks that could maybe break the sluice box, and another few down towards the bottom more would be stirring the fine dirt and black sand with brushes to wash away all the small particles. So after sluicing for a while, the miners would then check their sluice boxes for any signs of gold. Some of them would get lucky and strike it rich, others would come up empty. For those who did find gold, they would spend most of their time in the boom towns, such as Dawson City, at either the saloon, or they would be gambling their money away, or they would spend their money on prostitutes. The ones who haven't found gold are still in the gold fields busting their butts trying to find some gold. Of the 30,000 that actually made it to the gold fields, only around 3,000 of them actually found gold, and even less actually became rich because some of them only found enough gold to, let's say, cover their expenses for the journey over there. But others would obviously just become straight up rich. And the ones who didn't find any gold, they searched and searched, but they just came up empty. And a lot of these miners just left very disappointed that they didn't find any gold. Or some of them went on to make money in some other ways, such as running a business in a nearby boomtown, or even working for the miners who did strike it rich. So there was a lot of effects from this gold rush. Some were positive, but most negative. But the positive ones, at least, were that the influx of people into Dawson turned it into a legitimate city and also led to a population boom in the Yukon Territory, Alberta, British Columbia, and Vancouver. The gold rush is even credited with helping the United States out of a depression. And also for those lucky people that struck it rich, obviously that was positive for them because they were rich. So now on to the negative impacts. So the gold rush really devastated the environment by the gold fields because miners would cut and burn forests for the thawing fires they needed, tools, cabins, and they would even heat their cabins with this wood as well. And this led to deforestation, soil erosion, and massive floods. Miners also reused the water as it was flowing downstream through their sluice boxes, which led to water contamination. And the redirecting of water that they did corrupted the cycle of water flow and wildlife in the area. And also they cleared and burned a lot of the surface brush and moss, and that led to dry creeks in the spring. Miners would cut down and intentionally light forests on fire so that the fire would dry up the trees and blacken them to make them easier for harvest and use. And they also cleared and burned all the surface brush and moss to eradicate the bugs. And this deforestation caused landslides and floods. Thawing, the constant thawing and clearing of the surface brushes reduced the ability of the soil and plants to absorb water and regulate the flow of the rivers by gradually releasing that water over time. The ground held much of its water at the surface in the heavy layers of moss because the water couldn't go down into the deeper layers of soil because of all the permafrost. And all these mosses which carried all the water, the miners either cleared them out or they just completely burned them to eradicate all the bugs. So without these mosses, then there's nothing to regulate the flow of water in the streams, and that often led to dry creeks, which was essential for gold mining because they needed the water to separate their gold and dirt. So in 1898, a cluster of British capitalists and American engineers and laborers from all around began construction on the White Pass and Yukon Railroad. The railroad ran from Skagway across the White Pass to Whitehorse. The rails reached the summit in the winter of 1898 to 99, and it carried passengers and their freight to the top very quickly, which would have taken months or weeks the year before. Passengers paid $5 to take this train to the summit, at 25 cents a mile. Back then, this may have been the most expensive railroad travel in the world. On July 6, 1899, the rails reached Lake Bennett, which was just past the Chilka and White Pass. And the company later announced in that season that a new rate of 2.25 cents per pound of freight. And these miners were literally carrying a ton of supplies. And by May of 1900s, workers were laying down rail at 2 miles a day. And finally, on July 29th, 1900s, workers drove the final spike at Whitehorse, bypassing lakes Bennett, Tagish, and the Marsh Lakes. So, in addition to these railroads, in the summer of 1898, steamers also moved onto the upper Yukon River from Whitehorse to the Yukon or Dawson. The following year, they had completely replaced minor small boats and rafts that they had previously used to cross to get to Dawson. And these steamers ran in two legs and cost a good $300 either way because of the high demand early in the season. But later in the season, with the increased river traffic, the prices dropped down to only $75. And with all that, by the end of 1898, as word got out that there was little gold left, the gold rush slowed down, and countless miners had already left the Yukon penniless, leaving gold mining towns in a rapid decline. An estimated $1 billion of gold was also found, and the Klondike Gold Rush finally ended in 1899 with the discovery of gold in Nome, Alaska. This discovery reignited the dreams of many to strike it rich, and they soon forgot all the hardships that they had just faced in this gold rush, and they set off on a new journey to Nome. And that gold Nome, it was pretty much the same thing. Gold rushers would go, and most of them didn't find anything and left disappointed. And that's it. And I hope you guys enjoyed and enjoy the rest of you guys' day. Thank you.